Testing, 1, 2, 3.
All right, thank you everybody for being here. We're here today to announce that the state of Wisconsin has filed suit against two Purdue Pharma entities, Purdue Pharma LP and Purdue Pharma Inc., as well as Richard S. Sackler for conduct that involves, we've alleged, deceptive marketing practices with respect to the sale of drugs, and public nuisance. Before I go into a bit more detail about that case, I want to thank everyone for being here, including Flo Hilliard, the Executive Director of Wisconsin Voices of Recovery, who will be speaking next, Dane County Sheriff Dave Mahoney, Dane County Sheriff Sergeant R.J. Lurquin, Representative Deb Kolste, and Governor Evers. I also want to specifically thank the members of the team at the Department of Justice who have worked on this case and our team who's been working to address the opioid epidemic more broadly. Wisconsin is one of 5 states that has filed suit against Purdue Pharma entities today. 4 of those states have filed suit against at least one member of the Sackler family. With these 5 states filing suit, I hope that we are sending a clear message about the seriousness with which AGs in states around the country are taking these cases and taking our attempt to get accountability in connection with the opioid epidemic. Because what our suits allege is that the opioid epidemic was not inevitable. This epidemic has torn families apart. It has led to the overdose deaths of thousands of Wisconsinites. It has strained our foster care services. It has strained our health care system. It has strained our criminal justice system. And the effects go on from there. This was not inevitable. We allege that the opioid epidemic is in part attributable to the deceptive marketing practices of Purdue Pharma, which Richard Sackler played a significant role in directing and overseeing. In particular, we allege that the risks of opioid addiction, the risks of overdose, were downplayed, and that the benefits of opioids were overstated in an effort to change the culture regarding the prescription of opioids, to reduce the reluctance that the public had in taking opioids and the reluctance that prescribers had in prescribing opioids. I want to emphasize that a complaint involves allegations. It is not proven in court, and it's important to remember that this is just the allegation stage. But what is alleged is that 2 Purdue Pharma entities and Richard Sackler have violated 3 different, two statutes, prohibitions against deceptive marketing in general, prohibitions against deceptive marketing in the sale of prescription drugs, and that their conduct constitutes a public nuisance. So with that, let me introduce Flo Hilliard.
Thank you, Attorney General Kaul. My name is Flo Hilliard. I am the director of Wisconsin Voices for Recovery and another project within that called Emergency Department 2 Recovery. And we are housed in the Department of Family Medicine and Community Health at the University of Wisconsin-Madison. And I was asked to come here today to talk about recovery. I would like to talk about recovery, and I will talk about recovery in terms of people being able to, and the goal of what we do is to try to help people understand that recovery is possible, that there are many of us, including myself, in long-term recovery, not just from opioid addiction, but from addiction in general, and to help other people reduce the stigma, reduce the bias that they may have against people with addiction. Today, though, I am here to talk about a little bit about what we have been trying to do to address this opioid crisis and how it has affected our recovery community. So we actually are an advocacy organization that reduces stigma, provides hope and recovery, and is achievable. We let people know that recovery is achievable and put a face and voice to recovery. We represent the recovery community, and our membership is over 20,000 people and all across the state. And that isn't just people in recovery. That is family members who still have people suffering from the disease of addiction. It is people who have friends and family members who are in recovery from addiction, and those advocates and professionals who work every day tirelessly to try to help people get into recovery and maintain recovery. Recovery is like a lot of other diseases that are chronic and that can have relapses. People with, say, type 2 diabetes, hypertension, heart disease, it's the same kind of disease. It's a long-term recovery process. It's not a one and done. What we've been trying to do since the opioid crisis has started for the last 2 years, with the help of the Department of Health Services, Wisconsin Voices of Recovery has been able to leverage our recovery community to help people address the opioid crisis around the state and those suffering from it. We have trained over 150 people in recovery to become certified peer specialists or recovery coaches. And they are now working with 26 different hospitals all across the state. And they actually go into the emergency rooms and meet people who've had overdoses where they're at, help them feel trusted, help them feel not ashamed, and help them know that recovery is possible. In the short time this program has been implemented, the peer support staff has connected with over 700 people, and that's just been in a little over a year and a half, in emergency rooms across the state. Many of those have been able to reach and maintain recovery, but unfortunately, we have a lot of stories that are not as positive of an ending. I know that for myself, working with people, both when I was a clinician and now when I'm the director of Wisconsin Voices for Recovery, I have dozens of stories of people who had overdoses but were fortunate enough to be able to get the help they needed to get Narcan, and now they are in long-term recovery. But hearing someone talk about an overdose and seeing that person alive makes you not only grateful but gives you chills of what could have happened, what it could have been. One of my staff members talks about this a lot. She is a family member. Her brother has been struggling with opioid addiction for a number of years on and off, and ended up having to find him. Actually, her son found him on the floor of their home, and she had to use Narcan to bring him out of his overdose. She was able to, of course, she's a person who she works as a certified substance abuse counselor. She knows what to do, how to do it, when to do it, and was finally able, though, after more than one overdose, to help him get and accept treatment, long-term treatment. And now he is in recovery and has found about 6 months of recovery. But we feel like we are battling an uphill battle. We are getting calls from hospitals all over the state about, can you please come and have recovery coaches at our emergency department? We have overdoses and we don't know how to handle it. We don't know what to do. We don't know. We send them out and then they come right back because, this disease is something that, an opioid disease is, each one of the drugs has a certain type of action in the brain. And the problem with opioid addiction is that it can be so fatal so quickly. And so that's what we are up against. And we are hopeful that with some of the actions that are happening today and with us continuing to do what we're doing, that we will able to eventually say we no longer have an opioid crisis. Unfortunately, though, I think that's a ways off. So thank you for listening to me. I'd be more than happy to talk to any of you about it who would like to get involved in this and help other people find recovery or get support if you're a family member. So with that, I will turn it over to the next speaker. Thank you.
Good morning. My name's Dave Mahoney, and I'm your Dane County Sheriff. In my 40-year career as a law enforcement officer, I've seen the impact of drug addiction, and I have never seen the impact that we are undergoing today with the epidemic of opiate addiction. All across our country, not just in our state of Wisconsin, but all across our country, we have families and individuals who have been impacted by this deadly epidemic. Today, I want to personally thank and commend our Attorney General Josh Kaul and the dedicated attorneys at the Department of Justice for taking a significant step to address this addiction to a person. When we respond in the community to a drug overdose, specifically an opiate, we learn that that addiction began with the use of prescription painkillers. This must end. In Dane County alone, we're responding to 12 to 15 overdoses a week. Fortunately, our law enforcement officers are equipped with life-saving Narcan. But there is a cost of hundreds and hundreds of thousands of dollars to make sure that we have those tools to save lives. This epidemic must stop. There is not a family, not an individual, who has not been impacted by this epidemic, either personally, knowing a neighbor, or fiscally being impacted by this addiction. We as a state, we as a country must address this epidemic. And again, I want to thank our Attorney General Josh Kaul and the attorneys of our Wisconsin Department of Justice who are doing that today.
Good afternoon, or actually it is afternoon, I think. My name is Sergeant R.J. Lurquin. I'm a sergeant with the Dane County Sheriff's Office. I'd like to thank the sheriff for allowing me to speak for a few moments, and of course to Attorney Kaul for inviting me to speak. I've been with the Dane County Sheriff's Office for over 29 years. One of my most recent assignments was as a supervisor for the Dane County Narcotics Task Force. During that time in the task force, we obviously are doing our best, and it's an uphill battle trying to fight the crime of opioid abuse. We are constantly getting calls and tips and all kinds of information, and a lot of it is dealing with people who are preying on other people that are suffering from the disease of addiction. And it's law enforcement's responsibility not only to go after those people, but to hold them accountable and to reach out and help the people that need the help, that are vulnerable to the people who prey on these people suffering from addiction. Over the past year, I've been assigned, my time in the Dane County Narcotics Task Force had come up, and I've now been assigned to the Dane County Jail. I run one of our 3 buildings in the jail. Again, this is not only a professional issue, but a personal issue for me. My son suffered with the disease of addiction and unfortunately passed away in 2017. The devastating effects of opioid abuse affects not only an individual, but a family and a community. And any step we can take to help alleviate the stress and the tragedy that involves addiction is a step in the right direction. Even in the Dane County Jail, we recently had to get body scanners for all new persons booked into the Dane County Jail because the epidemic is so bad that people suffering from the disease of addiction will do anything they can, even as far as a possible added on criminal charge and sneaking drugs into our jail. So even a secure facility like the Dane County Jail has to deal with the issue of people trying to smuggle drugs into our jail. The body scanners are working, and we continuously are finding contraband on people being brought into the jail. Even after we tell them, we kind of give them a pass and let them know that they're going to go through the scanner, and we tell them, if you have something that shouldn't be in the jail, let us know right now, and they'll still try to sneak it in. So the sheriff and our agency has taken that initiative to bring in body scanners to help prevent possible overdoses within the Dane County Jail. Again, we are obligated to help those who suffer from addiction, and we're also obligated to hold those accountable who prey on those people suffering from addiction. And again, Attorney Kaul has taken the steps, and his staff and his agency, to help hold those people accountable that prey on the people suffering from addiction. Thank you.
Good morning. I'm Representative Deb Kolste, and I can't thank Attorney General Kaul and the Department of Justice any more than this is the day. I am so appreciative of this day, but probably less so than the families of people that have been afflicted by this disease. They were caught up in a scheme that went nationally in trying to get opiates into the hands of everyone they could. This has been a strain. The scourge has been a strain on the state, not only in the lost lives and livelihoods, but also on the finances. We, as the state worked to put Narcan, make Narcan available and permit its use, and has implemented the PDMP, just when we think we've made some progress, there's another crescendo in this disease. It's a deadly disease. Richard Portnoy started this with a study that said, Purdue Pharma wants to get this OxyContin in the hands of more people, so he extrapolated that if you took it on an acute basis in an inpatient hospital and you didn't get addicted over 2 or 3 days, you should be able to use it chronically and not be affected. It then worked its way into the hospitals where they developed the pain scale and made it part of Medicare, all in a system that put opiates in the hands of more and more people. And it has been at a great cost to our nation. It's just not Wisconsin, it's in the entire nation. The United States used more opiates than any other nation in the world per capita. It is time that we put a stop to this. And again, I just want to applaud Attorney General Kaul and the DOJ. This has been a long time coming, and I am so glad that it happens today. With that, I would like to introduce my governor, the people's governor, a governor that understands how important this issue is and is working fervently to get more dollars into the healthcare system to provide for the healthcare and safety of its citizens. I'd like to present Governor Tony Evers.
Good morning, everybody, and thank you, Representative Kolste, for the comments and your introduction, and of course, Attorney General Kaul and all the people at the Department of Justice that have worked on this issue and your leadership, and the other speakers who have graciously given up their time to talk about this important issue today. Today's announcement is a critically important one, not just for the families who have been directly affected by Purdue, but for our friends and family members and neighbors whose lives have been affected by substance abuse and addiction. This is an issue that is a 72-county issue. Every county in the state of Wisconsin, thousands of Wisconsinites across the state. But it's especially in situations like this one where we have people who are seeking life-saving medical treatment or care and instead find themselves in a compromised position because of the actions of others. The people we're trying to get justice for here today were just trying to get the medication they needed and to get the health care they needed without increased risk for addiction, abuse, or tolerance. Well, that's just not happening. And because of this, Purdue and the Sackler family led consumers and the healthcare community to believe the myth that opioids were the best way to treat chronic pain. That's wrong. And it's time for Purdue and companies like Purdue across the world to be held accountable to the people who've suffered at the hands of these decisions and dishonesty. And we must fight for justice for our friends, families, and communities who've been affected by those deceptions. Thank you very much for being here, and I'll turn it back over to the Attorney General.
Thank you all for being here again. Thank you to all of our speakers. And with that, we are happy to take questions. So one of the claims in the case is a claim that there's an ongoing public nuisance, and there has been a request in the complaint for injunctive relief. Precisely what the terms of that injunctive relief would be would depend on the way that the case goes forward. But one of the claims is that there have been deceptive marketing practices, and certainly discontinuing any deceptive practices is certainly part of the relief that we're hoping to see. These are claims that are brought under state law in state courts. We had announced previously that Wisconsin is part of a multi-state investigation into manufacturers, but in terms of the individual cases, they've been filed under state law in the state courts. The allegation is that Purdue, in part at the direction of Richard Sackler, sought to change the public perception of opioids, including for consumers and for medical providers. The goal of that was to sell more OxyContin and ultimately more opioids, and the result of that was that Purdue and Mr. Sackler made significant amounts of money. There were two sort of core components of that effort that we have alleged. One is that there was an effort to overstate the benefits of prescribing opioids. For instance, there were attempts to present opioids as the best solution for chronic pain. There also were efforts to downplay the harms of opioids, to downplay the risk of addiction and the risk of overdose. To cite a couple examples that are mentioned in the complaint, Purdue promoted a concept of what was called pseudo-addiction. That was the concept that people who were suffering symptoms that appeared to be withdrawal because of drug dependence may just need higher doses to address their pain. We've alleged that that is not supported by the evidence. Another example alleged in our complaint is that as OxyContin in its original formulation neared the end of its patent, Purdue Pharma pulled that drug from sales and marketing and offered a reformulation of OxyContin, which it alleged was tamper-resistant. Purdue then argued that the FDA should not allow the generic production of the original formulation of OxyContin on the grounds that it was too dangerous. The very substance that Purdue itself had been selling and promoting. So those are some of the allegations that are made in the complaint. So our complaint addresses the resolution that involved Purdue in 2007. Purdue entered into a consent judgment at that point. This suit is based on conduct that is subsequent to that consent judgment. Purdue entered into certain agreements there, and one of the allegations is that Purdue did not live up to the terms of that consent judgment. So today's lawsuit is brought against Purdue. My predecessor, Attorney General Schimmel, as I mentioned before, announced that Wisconsin is part of a multi-state investigation into manufacturers of prescription drugs. And earlier this year, I announced that we're part of a multi-state investigation into distributors of prescription drugs. I'm not going to comment on the details of those investigations, but we have announced that there are investigations going on into other companies, not solely Purdue. So what we're focused on in the conference today is the allegations that have been made in this complaint, which relate specifically to Purdue, the two Purdue entities, and Richard Sackler. But one of the things that we've alleged is that this attempt to deceive people applied not just to consumers, but also to medical providers, that Purdue attempted to change the understanding in the medical community as to the risks of prescribing opioids. And that the effects of that are clear. The number of opioid prescriptions over the last slightly over 20 years increased dramatically. It has finally started to reduce here in Wisconsin. But this was an effort to deceive not just consumers but also providers. So ultimately, how opioids are prescribed, I think, is something that should be thought through by entities like the CDC. There are certainly occasions on which the prescription of very strong, potent opioids is appropriate. For example, in the case of somebody dealing with palliative care, somebody who's dealing with major side effects from cancer, for example. But what is critical is that the marketing practices that relate to those opioids acknowledge the risks and the benefits of those opioids, and that they're truthful. That is one of the steps we need to take, I think, in addressing the opioid epidemic. We are seeking both damages. That includes compensation for the harms that have resulted from the public nuisance. We're also seeking civil penalties. And in the injunction, we are seeking to enjoin unlawful conduct that we've alleged has been committed by the Purdue entities and Richard Sackler, and in particular, enjoining deceptive marketing practices to promote opioids. We have some allegations in the complaint that detail what the costs are, but the short answer is that the costs are enormous. We have lost thousands of lives to this epidemic. Far more people struggle with addiction. They are family members or friends of people who are struggling with addiction. This has imposed strains on our criminal justice system, on the foster care system. The number of kids who've been separated from a parent due to a drug addiction has increased significantly. It's imposed strains on our medical system as overdoses have led to people going to ERs. So the costs both here in Wisconsin and around the country have been enormous.